you're right on time for today's discussion, and we're going to talk about the ECOWAS conundrum. I'll explain why it is a conundrum in just a moment. Just a quick reminder, you can watch the show on the go by following us across our social media platforms and joining our YouTube and Facebook live streams so that you don't miss out on any of the conversation as well as the content. Well, the ECOWAS conundrum, it is not only the military interregnums that have destabilized political leadership across Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso and other countries. Well, yesterday, the rest of the sub-region woke up to the news that Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger have decided to withdraw their membership from the regional bloc. This 47-year-old experiment apparently is facing one of its biggest challenges yet. And everybody is trying to understand the ramifications, the implications, and what this could mean for ECOWAS going forward and what it will mean for regional stability, growth, and development. Well, let's speak to someone who understands regional diplomacy or global diplomacy, as a matter of fact, and what this means for Nigerians, especially as the civil society organizations as CISLAC, Transparency International say Nigeria is one of the biggest losers because of these developments. So we're going to shed light on this and many other issues attached to what has been a very interesting political and diplomatic development across this part of the continent. Join us on the program is diplomat Haruna Ali Warkani, who is here to always provide us with professional and expertise perspective to some of these developments. Good morning to you, and thank you very much for joining us on the program. It's good to see you as always.
Thank you.
Right. Let's start this way. Your 2 cents on the first development, which was the decision, the sovereign decision, as they put it, by Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso to withdraw from ECOWAS as a regional bloc.
Well, it is rather sad to start with that ECOWAS should ever have this day coming, yesterday. A very sad day, very unexpected day, though seen very clearly as soon as the coup in Niger occurred. I recall in July we were here, and we did observe then that if care is not taken, if ECOWAS does not move along some lines of rational reasoning alone, there could be this development coming. Because what was at stake then, and as you can see, what has played out, is the question of sovereignty. Countries have a right to exercise sovereignty in any circumstance. National interest of a country precedes any other thing. And when the coup occurred in Niger, the rather panic measures taken was the major concern, which we did observe then that it was wrong and it could lead to some other things. Second, the underlying factors that might not be obvious to so many is the fact that the world has changed globally. Politicking and dynamics of relationships have changed significantly. And countries have therefore redefined who they are and are constantly doing so. Now, the young men in uniform in these 3 countries, because all of them are very young people, their reasoning are far apart from the established reasoning of other leaders within the sub-region. I think that's a very, very important thing. People are tired of colonialism, and we have seen that the steps taken by these countries included the expulsion of the colonial master France within their territories. these things have played out in such a way that today we are having this departure, unfortunately, of these countries, which will impact significantly on ECOWAS, because we are veering towards even the disappearance of ECOWAS itself.
Right. Okay, let's understand what the treaty provides, especially looking at the issue of withdrawal. So we're just going to take you through excerpts from the ECOWAS treaty and take a look at this particular graphic that talks about withdrawal, right? It says any member state wishing to withdraw from the community shall give to the executive secretary 1 year's notice in writing, who shall inform member states thereof. At the expiration of this period, if such notice is not withdrawn, such a state shall cease to be a member of the community. This is all part of Article 91. It says during the period of 1 year referred to in the preceding paragraph, which is about withdrawal, such a member state shall continue to comply with the provisions of this treaty and shall remain bound to discharge its obligations under this treaty. So it's safe to say it doesn't just happen just like that. They can't just will it into existence. There are processes and procedures. And we also understand that ECOWAS is saying, listen, we have not officially been notified of any withdrawal.
Yeah.
So what do you make of this?
Well, that is the provision of the treaty. Unfortunately, you are dealing with a very peculiar situation. Peculiar in the sense that you have a member country, or countries in this case, who are under suspension. This was what we observed. Suspending and imposing sanctions on member countries presupposes that ECOWAS on itself has violated this provision. And that is where you will have difficulties, and that is why, if you look at the text of the...
Just to, to key into what you're saying, this is the part where it talks about sanctions applicable for non-fulfillment of obligations, for instance, where it says sanctions may include suspension of new community loans or assistance, suspension of disbursement of ongoing community projects or assistance, exclusion of presenting candidates for statutory and professional posts, suspension of voting rights, suspension from participating in the activities of the community. And these are all guidelines. So one would say, in defense of ECOWAS as a bloc, it is well within its right to do this, because there is a provision that allows for suspending member states.
Oh, sure. The suspension can come by ways of whatsoever. However, diplomatically, it was not necessary. Talking behind the scene would have solved this problem better. Because we did say here, if you suspend someone or an organization or country from a body, why would you still be talking to that body? It's a nexus that is very difficult to perhaps understand. And this is exactly what has happened. These countries were suspended, and the organization was still talking to them, agreed, behind the scene. Now, here what has happened is a clear failure of democracy, diplomacy. A clear failure of diplomacy, because...
On whose part?
Both. Both.
Clearly, soldiers and diplomacy is like a paradox, isn't it?
It is a paradox. However, interestingly enough, even ECOWAS itself, fundamentally, was formed by a group of military generals. 1974-75, General Yakubu Gowon, Lamizana, Sani Kunche, Nasimbe Yadima, Siaka Stevens, generally were all military guys that came into power and visioned the formation of ECOWAS and went around within themselves and created ECOWAS. So you can see, politicians were not really part of the project from inception. And so you have something that ordinarily one would have expected that the leaders of the sub-region should have done much more than what has just happened to sustain this. Now, withdrawal, it's something that is very difficult to to assess or analyze. ECOWAS experienced this first in 2000 when Mauritania requested to withdraw from ECOWAS on reasons of sociological considerations of non-ethnic mix that allowed them to feel free in ECOWAS and the rest of them. But I recall vividly in the year 2000 when they requested to withdraw, it became very painful because the staff members who were from Mauritania, when the day came for them to leave ECOWAS, all of us were crying. They were crying, we were crying for simply dislocating ourselves and, saying bye-bye to someone you have been working with for a very long time. It
was amicable.
Well, it was amicable, but it still created a lot of problems. Because even in the nitty-gritty of a withdrawal, there are a lot of issues. And I can tell you, from the year 2000 up to today, there are still some issues lingering relating to that withdrawal.
Divorce, right.
Yes, because the money spent by ECOWAS in Mauritania and vis-a-vis Mauritania's investments in ECOWAS are still pending. There had been efforts to say, okay, maybe we will also want to come back to ECOWAS after some time. However, a lot of issues have been there. And then the new members that wanted to also join ECOWAS as a result of this movement are still there. Morocco is still in the wings waiting to say, look, we want to join. Chad, on the other side, in Central Africa, had indicated interest to join ECOWAS. So there is a lot of mix in all this. But this particular one, for them to emphasize that the withdrawal is with immediate effect, you can see the militariness in such an
the writing, right?
Good, which means by today, Monday, the staff will ordinarily cease to be staff members of the commission, of the community. And this cuts across a lot of institutions. Abuja here was 3. So many other countries have plenty of institutions scattered all over the sub-region, and you have staff members from these countries who will surely be affected by all this. And like we said before, when countries exercise sovereignty, it becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
Talks can continue behind the scene on, you didn't give us 1 year to withdraw, and so it's ineffective, etc., etc. But what they are saying is, for them as a country, they have gone.
Is there a chance that this is another chess move by these military leaders to negotiate for more time or to negotiate a deal that allows them to stay in power? Is this just another way of perhaps getting leverage over ECOWAS? Because if they threaten to leave, they appear to have the upper hand.
Well, they are not threatening.
Well, okay, it's no longer a threat. At least they have made the pronouncement they have left.
Yes, this is the difference. Like I said with Mauritania, for instance, Mauritania followed the due process to say we intend to leave the community by so period as a result of XYZ reasons, right? ECOWAS processed that within that 1 year, there had been a lot of diplomatic shuttles to see if Mauritania could change its mind and remain. Unfortunately, it did not. Now, here, they are saying emphatically, we have gone. They are not giving notice.
I think they say that they are going out. They are withdrawing.
Yeah, well, they are going, which means they have gone.
Yeah, but it's not complete. Even they would know that ECOWAS as a community has to ratify their withdrawal because, it was signed on paper, them joining the community, and it has to be signed on paper that they have left.
Don't forget, these guys have been experimenting with the suspension. Within this period of suspension, they are already effectively out of ECOWAS. You read out the conditions for suspension. Non-participation, non-approval of loans, whatsoever. Plenty of reasons that had been given as a condition. Once you are suspended, you cease to enjoy those rights, staffing, voting rights, etc., etc. Which means From, let's say, take the last coup in Niger. From July, Niger effectively was not part of ECOWAS. So they have been in practice of what it meant to be out of ECOWAS.
Is suspension akin to expulsion? Because I think you're painting two different pictures. For some who say suspension is only temporary, expulsion is permanent.
Temporary to who is expelling. Permanent to who has been expelled. So for them, I am saying, they have been like practicing to live without ECOWAS. That's what the suspension meant to them. They have been practicing to live without ECOWAS. You can't participate in ECOWAS meetings. You cannot do this. You cannot trade. You cannot access loans. You cannot vote. Your staff cannot be employed. I mean, that was effectively what it meant, to be away from the community. And they were away from the community since July, for instance, the last one. Now, that kind of situation has created a further move to say, yes, we can negotiate, but as you can see, negotiations have broken down. Because we did say before, the demands of the military governments and the diplomatic position of ECOWAS were two diametrically opposed positions. You cannot have what you want at all times, and so it became very difficult to negotiate, particularly the transition period of when democracy or rule of law can be restored to these countries.
So you don't think this is a strategic negotiation tactic on the military leadership, on the military junta's part?
It might be difficult to assume so, because...
I mean, this 1 year is still there on the table, and I know that, you know, they might be soldiers, but they have done their due diligence on the fact that they know that withdrawal takes at least a year, right? So what are the chances that, you know, within this year, because as we read within Article 91, that, you know, within this 1 year, if you don't withdraw your letter of withdrawal from ECOWAS after 1 year, then effectively you are no longer a part of the community. That within this 1 year, the negotiations could be, how do we get these 3 member states to stay with ECOWAS, and that gives the military leadership some leverage to negotiate for further time to stay in power before a transition takes place?
Yeah, there's a difference. Had they submitted an application letter of intent to withdraw, that would have been traditional. However, what we are observing here is
Is that communique not enough?
Which
the communique they released yesterday about their withdrawal?
No, the communique was very, very clear. They are not saying an intention. They are saying they have taken an action. There are two different things here. The wordings of all these are very, very important diplomatically.
So they're going about it the wrong way then?
Yes.
And does that invalidate what they're doing?
It doesn't necessarily. Like we said, you cannot belong to an organization by force. It's not possible.
But they signed the treaty.
They signed the treaty, yes, but they cannot also belong by force.
But if they have to leave, and I know that, you know, these things can be contentious. I mean, the entire world was inundated with the whole Brexit affair, leaving the EU. For years and years, they were negotiating their departure. And we've seen how difficult and tricky that could be, even without the military component of this one. What do you suppose? I mean, you say we have some kind of experience with this, some 24 years ago,
yes,
right? But apparently, as inevitable as this might have seemed, like a couple of months ago with the suspension, and we're saying, listen, this is overheating the polity, and there's a very good chance that these military guys, with the solidarity that they've shown to one another, might decide to leave eventually. You've always talked about the quorum in ECOWAS being
very
lost.
Correct, yes.
Give me a sense of how ECOWAS could roll this situation back to some appreciable level where cooler heads will prevail and negotiations could resume effectively.
Well, I think it's extraordinary, to be honest with you. It's an extraordinary event, and it requires extraordinary measures, which will include, to my mind, we want to have been in a position to suggest that since there is a founding father of ECOWAS who is still alive, in the person of General Yakubu Gowon, he has kind of survived everything. I think the community needs to lean more on him to do much more.
Does he have any kind of political pull with these countries, you think?
Well,
why do you think they would listen to him?
Well, basically these are his grandchildren, to start with, as an African. And therefore, the ECOWAS Council of the Wise ought to be activated beyond the normal. Very senior diplomats in the sub-region, outside the ECOWAS Commission, in various countries, needs to be pulled together. And an extraordinary situation requires an extraordinary response. Therefore, it is not necessarily based on the text of either the treaty or some of the additional protocols of ECOWAS. No. It should be a situation where we will try to look at something very different from what has ever happened, including the body of traditional rulers within the sub-region, across all countries, including the countries affected by this situation, I think should find a way to talk to the military guys to say, yes, agreed. The grievances as summarized in that communique are pertinently correct, because ECOWAS should not be seen to be serving external forces within this sub-region.
And is that true? How much of that is true? Because they did say that they're disappointed that their organization has moved away from the ideas of its founding fathers and Pan-Africanism. Furthermore, ECOWAS, under the influence of foreign powers, betraying its founding principles, has become a threat to its members and its population, whose happiness it is supposed to ensure. And it went on and on and on and on and on, adopting irrational and unacceptable posture by imposing illegal, illegitimate, inhumane, and irresponsible sanctions in violation of its own text. All things which have further weakened populations already bruised by years of violence imposed by instrumentalized and remote-controlled terrorist hordes. How much of this is actually, political speak to justify what they're doing, and how much of it do you think is actually going to resonate with their own population and people across the continent?
In fact, you could see that clearly whoever was the author of this text that translates into a communique had done a very good job academically. On the practical level, and for purposes of diplomacy, yes, it summarizes the grievances these countries have against the community, which we cannot run away from. Because if, after 40-something years, we are still subservient to foreign powers meddling in the affairs of the region, I think, yes, it calls for a reflection, a very deep reflection, because it means independence means nothing. And I think that is the stream in which they are complaining bitterly. Now, you cannot deny this, because there are evidences all over the place. The presence of France here in this sub-region, we have said, I remember you asked me, why don't we have a single currency? And I said the simple answer is France's presence here. This is what is playing out. France's position in West Africa has created more problem than solutions. You have maintained a military base within the sub-region, and there were more conflicts experienced in the same sub-region There's a military base in Mali, in Niger, in Chad, Senegal, all within the sub-region. And yet, insurgency and what have you are on the increase. If this presence were actually to counterbalance the activity of insurgents, by now there should be a drop. Unfortunately, it is getting much more sophisticated, it's getting more bolder, and the claim of taking over the entire Sahel is becoming more pronounced, which means these things are not really working. And the leaders, political leaders in West Africa, need to wake up and look at it differently. I do also understand Nigeria is even trying to say France should come and assist it today in the management of the security situation, which is counterproductive in so many respects.
And
so many respects, because these are the same country that have been kicked out in West Africa. 1, 2, 3 countries, 4 actually, have said, France, go. We no longer need you. And Nigeria is saying, yes, we want to take you. I mean, it's a contradiction.
Right. And one of the common denominators that all these 3 countries have is that they were all colonized by France. And they all seem to be on the same page regarding what France represents in the region, what France represents as far as their challenges are concerned. Do you think that, you know, this withdrawal is going to serve as a wake-up call to really address these neo-colonial tendencies that our relationship with the international big players like France and the United States, for instance, have come to represent? Because you get a sense that there is this new wave of fight against neo-colonialism, so to say, in the region.
Well, surely, like even the Council of the Wise, in the context of ECOWAS provisions, and even for just making sure we get it right, should include, like we said, maybe traditional rulers and some other people to appeal to these young men, because all of them are young people, very, very young people. And yes, the typical African saying, their heads are hot. So they might not be akin to some of the normal traditional approaches to some of these things. In the negotiations, assuming there were to be any that can be initiated, the position of France...
Are you suggesting that the window for negotiation is closing?
No, it's closing. It's closing because they are quite aware of the 1-year requirement as notice for withdrawal. They refuse to go through that route. What they have said, take note of the wordings of that communique. They are withdrawing with immediate effect, which means something really went wrong somewhere. The negotiations hitherto have failed. To them, it wasn't yielding results, and they don't think they can continue to waste time negotiating with an organization that says you are suspended, you are under sanctions, and there was even a threat of military intervention.
In one country?
Yes. Those things are very severe. Military intervention should have been such that if the territorial integrity of the entire perimeter of ECOWAS was violated, and ECOWAS was now raising a standby force to say, we need to go and defend a particular member country. That's different. But when internally you decide to invade a country, yes, it sends...
I don't think that decision was made, though. There was a threat of military action, but it was never acted upon.
Yeah, it was never acted upon because it also was illegal in a way, because obtaining the permissions of the parliaments across the sub-region became almost impossible. That was what happened. But we have seen that military chiefs have been gathered, strategies were planned, and they were threatening to say they will surely go and enforce an invasion. However, the invasion was not practical because between some of these countries, beside the multilateral relationships, there are also bilateral relationships that are very complex. The relationship between Nigeria and Niger in particular became very, very difficult to manage, because as we speak, even today, we still have refugees from Borno State in particular in Niger. How do you do that? You can't invade such a country when you have interests that are profoundly intertwined with the local setting of the communities. Yeah. Across the borders, there's no distinction between a Nigerian and a Nigerian.
Right. And we have civil society organizations who are weighing in, saying this is a big loss for ECOWAS already, as things stand, but also that this is a big loss for Nigeria, because this big brother role that we have been playing on the continent for quite some time is once again being eroded with what has played out right now. You have the president of Nigeria chairing the ECOWAS head of states and governments at this point in time. Do you think this indicts our political leadership of the region so far?
It is nothing more than that. It's nothing but that exactly. It's an indictment of politicians generally, let me say. It's an indictment of politicians generally, because now you can see it's a battle between politics and the military in a way. Because what these young people are saying, young leaders in these countries are saying, is we are fed up with the old system of approach. And politically, there should have been a solution behind the scene all this while, from when this coup started in these countries to this day. But apparently, the political leadership has not been able to use politics and diplomacy to solve this problem.
Yeah, but we've seen religious leaders, right, with big organizations behind their back. We've seen traditional leaders. We've seen the likes of General Abdulsalami Abubakar, for instance, go over to Niger, all in an effort to negotiate something. And we've seen that their correspondence with the president here in Nigeria to talk about their findings in the back and forth. You talk about the Council of the Wise, in the community. Has ECOWAS as a bloc not done its best to really go about using the carrot instead of the stick to address these issues from the get-go?
Yes, I think there was an apparent imbalance in the approach to the negotiations. I'll give you one particular instance. ECOWAS still maintains a position that the ousted president in Niger, President Bazoum, must be restored as part of the negotiations. And we did say here, restoring Bazoum in Niger will be like the sun rising from the west.
You're saying it's impossible?
Yes. I said it before, and I am repeating this today. It is literally impossible, because except you go and also conduct another military coup, the military guys or leaders in power today in Niger are not going to sit back and wait for you to bring Bazoum back to power. Now, unfortunately, ECOWAS is still in very close collaboration with the ousted government. The ousted government is still participating in ECOWAS meetings. That in itself makes negotiations very difficult. Because if you suspend a country, suspend the country. If you suspend an administration, that will be one-sided. And now Niger is still participating in ECOWAS affairs without the military government that is in power. These are some of the things that makes negotiations very, very difficult.
I thought just a couple of weeks ago, we're at least seeing some light in that negotiation when they released his son, provisionally released his son and wife. I'm talking about Mohamed Bazoum in Niger, to the Togo ambassador. I thought we were making some sort of headway as far as these negotiations are concerned. What do you think might have happened between that and this decision that was made public over the weekend?
Well, plenty of things are definitely going on. The undercurrents are what are not commonly known on the scene, but issues that are sometimes unofficial and therefore might not be commented upon. But surely you would see that the release of the son and wife were more or less humanitarian grounds based on pleadings from good persons, in quotes. Good persons could be defined differently by the administration and by the commission or community. So yes, it looked like there was, but in essence, the fact that ECOWAS is seen by the military junta that you are still talking to someone who is against us makes it very difficult. So perhaps distancing ECOWAS from the hostile government would have created some healing process to give the military some sense of, okay, yeah, we are still talking. We don't want to unnecessarily inflame situations, and therefore the past administration, please stay one side. Let us do our talking. Let us do the meetings and the rest of them. That would have created a ground for the military to know that, okay, I think something can come out of it.
Did you get a sense that with regards to reinstating Bazoum, it was negotiable or non-negotiable on the part of ECOWAS? Was ECOWAS saying Bazoum must come back no matter what? Or did you get a sense of we can negotiate whether he comes back or not?
No, it was a very clear position.
He must come back.
Bazoum must come back because, you know, it's an intricate kind of a thing. If he doesn't come back, it means you accept the coup. Right? On the side of the military government in Niger, if he comes back, it means also the coup is not recognized. So it's a matter of recognition and translating into some actions on the scene. Now that was where the problem really was and still is. Because without assurances and feelings of, yes, we are the same, I think the negotiations becomes very difficult, like we have seen, and ultimately might just break down like it has happened.
Right. You look at these countries, right? We talk about the loss for ECOWAS, and we'll get back to the question about whether this is the beginning of the end for the regional bloc. But you look at these three countries, these are mostly landlocked countries, right?
Yeah.
What's the need for them to leave ECOWAS? Do these countries do better are they going to do better if they leave ECOWAS, if they successfully leave ECOWAS?
Well, they will do well in the sense that you don't change the geography. They have been landlocked since the existence. They will remain landlocked. Very good. So whatever happens politically or diplomatically at that level hardly changes anything. It's not as if because they were members of ECOWAS they had access to the sea. No, not necessarily so. Trade between these countries, we must remember, is even much more robust than between some others. And we might be seeing more members joining this alliance, which was announced some months ago, the Sahel Alliance. That was like a wake-up call to ECOWAS. When they launched that Sahel Alliance, it was...
You think the Sahel Alliance can rival ECOWAS successfully?
Not rival ECOWAS successfully, but now it will create an irritant, which is what it is today. It will create an irritant, because if you have that, you are going to have countries that will be more cohesive than it used to be. They are more cohesive in the sense that because of the colonial history and some shared values and traditions, shared geography and demography, shared economics, etc., etc., and even the feeling of we being landlocked, assuming countries like Guinea tomorrow joins them.
Which is possible?
Very possible. Very possible. If Togo tomorrow joins them.
Why would Togo join?
Well, it's a very intricate thing, which we should leave for the future. But we must be watchful, because the sub-region is still undergoing a lot of changes.
Has ECOWAS outlived its utility? Is it no longer fit for purpose based on the current structure? Because it looks like a considerable number of the members are unhappy with the current arrangement.
Very unhappy. Yeah, very unhappy. Utility value might still be there, because it is one of the most vibrant building blocks of the African Union. And for African Union, for instance, it is still trying to prop up these regional blocks to ensure that we achieve global continental government one time in the future. Therefore, its utility value transcends ECOWAS per se. However, within, yes, there is great disenchantment, because the dividends of integration seems not to permeate down to the level of the people. There may be government-to-government integration, but people-to-people integration seems to be very, very difficult to get to. The initial protocols that ECOWAS approved, free movement and trade, had largely remained unimplemented in a way as to show very good results. These are some of the issues. People have a single passport today, a unified passport across the sub-region. People travel freely without visa requirements. However, trade has remained very low, very, very low. And even in the movement of people, all the frontiers of ECOWAS are still very difficult to cross. People carry their passport, they go to the borders, and the security agencies make it almost impossible for you to move. We are supposed to be borderless by now. However, that is not happening because of security operatives doing it the wrong way. And the political leaders seem to be aloof, not doing what they are supposed to do. Monitoring seems to have failed completely, and you begin to see people finding it extremely difficult to move around. Now, if we cannot move around ourselves, trade becomes almost impossible. Tourism is very, very low. And so the cohesion that the Treaty of ECOWAS was supposed to have promoted seems not to have been achieved. And that is one of the reasons why people are truly asking the question, could ECOWAS still be relevant? The answer is yes, ECOWAS is relevant, but it needs to go home and rejig itself and approach this from a different perspective.
And do you think this wake-up call with the withdrawal of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso be that turning point for ECOWAS, if at all there is going to be some kind of reawakening of this regional bloc?
Well, this event, like I said, is one of the most sad events ever in ECOWAS, because it's definitely going to put into question the need to go back home and start thinking, oh boy, something happened, and we need to respond to this, and the response would determine how and which way we go from here. Now, it's important, I think, because it provides an opportunity for ECOWAS to undertake a reassessment, very, very fundamental reassessment of almost everything. Because like we said, prayers should be on that no other member country joins this group. Otherwise, ECOWAS ceases to also be, because it would have lost its quorum. And that will mean fundamentally the treaty needs to be renegotiated for ECOWAS to continue to exist.
All right. Right. And in looking at what comes next, right? Obviously, the Commission is saying, listen, we have not formally been notified of this move. What do you expect is the standard operating procedure here? Are we going to see ECOWAS make moves to further perhaps boost the negotiation talks with these military leaderships? And do you also see these military leaders now having the upper hand as far as any future negotiations are concerned?
Well, certainly with that kind of approach of a fiat accompli position, for them, they are not even expecting any negotiations. But now, any negotiation will have to be behind the scene, totally behind the scene.
Individually or as a collective with the soon-to-be former members of ECOWAS?
Yeah, well, it is a two-tier thing. It must be a two-tier approach, bilaterally and multilaterally. Bilaterally in the sense that ECOWAS and specific member countries need to continue to negotiate behind the scene, so that you also need to divide the ranks. Otherwise, if you allow them, as it were, they form a block, and that block might be very difficult to break. So there must be bilateral approach, there must be multilateral approach. Secondly, the African Union needs to come in, and come in very well in this situation, because today, in many, many cases, you will find that the African Union is literally absent. And you cannot be a continental body and keep quiet in the face of all these threats. After all, you are actually responsible for the formation of these regional blocks, ECOWAS, ECAS, COMESA, SADC, etc., to see that this becomes building blocks to assist the continent achieve a continental government sometimes in the future. We can't be too many countries, 50-something countries, and even counting, because some countries are still agitating to go. I mean, some enclaves, let me see, sorry. Some enclaves are still agitating to leave their member countries, which means we might end up with a continent of 60 countries. Sudan is burning, right? Ethiopia, there's no comfort, and so like that. So the AU needs to come in and do the needful. There must be high-level diplomacy in this matter, such that it is seen now above ECOWAS. It should be seen above ECOWAS. And as well, ECOWAS should continue its negotiations, utilizing all possible means within the sub-region to ensure that this does not stand, because this will be the greatest disaster the sub-region was going to record since its formation in 1975. It's very, very sad indeed. And the management of ECOWAS itself, the leadership, political leadership, that to say, traditional leadership, should be deployed by any means possible to make sure reason prevails over this.
What do you say to people who worry that this could be the beginning of the end for this 51-year-old Pan-African experiment?
Well, it might be a little hasty to say so, but of course...
That's why I said beginning.
Yes. It's also surely more or less like a beginning, inevitable beginning. And it should be very worrisome to all of us as citizens of Africa and West Africa in particular, because all along the going has been cozy. All along the going seems to create hope for every citizen that one day we might achieve closer government. Okay, the AFTA has just been launched, and people are beginning, businesses are beginning to say, we might be happy to enjoy some of this. Now, if you begin to have chasms of this nature cropping up here and there, because it will not end with these three countries. There may be some others that will come and tell you, okay, they too have decided to go.
Right.
And it complicates the dynamics much more. So we need to do something better than what is happening now.
Ambassador Haruna Ali Warkani, thank you most kindly for sharing your insight and expert analysis on this one. Really appreciate you very much for stopping by and helping us understand the different perspectives to this development.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you, viewers.